tonight. My name is Gary Micheals. For those of you who have no idea who I am, get used to this. You're going to be seeing it before and after every act tonight. And we have 47 acts on tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, a little bit about me. My hobbies are drinking Guinness, throwing the first punch, and feeling ashamed. To put that briefly, I'm from Ireland. We're going to have a one raffle. And you get to all this shit's going to go. Why did someone take a picture of a child running after their loved person and be like, freaking looking child? I hope these aren't belong to somebody. They did. Who's after putting them up.
I know what would be a good idea. Let's all get our mates together and invest millions and make beer. That's great, that's great. I'd love to get drunk. No, not to get drunk. We're going to make it 2.1% beer. This is a Metland, isn't it? This is a... There's no way you're making all this money off 2.1% beer. I've had 63 pints tonight. So, yeah.
Okay, getting ready to begin, everybody. 12th of February, it's 8 p.m. I think we are ready to go live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Whining On. My name is Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue, and today I'm very pleased to have with me Gary Micheals. Gary, how you doing, buddy? Oh, I've still got you on mute. Sorry, it didn't last to you. How terrible. Let me give you your voice back.
Oh, God, this is a nightmare already, isn't it? I am very well. I'm very well now. It's nice to talk to somebody.
Yeah. Welcome back to interaction.
Yes, I've been talking to my girlfriend every day for a long time now, but it's nice to see hairier face.
Yes, thank you. I just left a little bit of stubble here for you because I know you do love it.
Yeah.
And one day you'll be able to have some just like mine.
Yeah, well, one day, many days. Yeah.
So, just to give people a bit of information, the music was playing just, I believe that was your band, right?
That was my old band, yes. That song would have been recorded on the second album, I'm going to say. So I would have been about, kind of guessing, but I think about 23, maybe, when that was released. So yeah, maybe 12 years ago or something now.
And so reasonably successful rock punk band. I'd probably say punk, listen to it.
Yeah, we changed a lot. I was in a band for 11 years. We changed quite a lot. I mean, I got in the band when I was 16 and I was in school with a drummer and very simple.
We'll do a proper chronological story into it now. I just want to give a little idea of stuff. So I was going to say, being in the band, successful, been a very successful street performer.
Well,
go back
to relative successful. Relative success. Lots of touring, lots of working, lots of releasing albums. So we got to taste all that. We got to give a lot. Didn't get much back. That's the best way I can put that. We used to have kind of like a running joke where, like, we could see our album in the shops, and we would laugh about it, because if I bought that album and gave the money and follow it, why does it never come back to me? Why do I see none? Like I don't. I know it needs to get lower and lower as it goes along the path, but how come it's just dissolves before it gets back to me? And so that was kind of a running joke for a long time. No matter what kind of a deal we thought we had, it was like, oh, this isn't working very well financially, is it? So.
But you did a lot more than most people do. You toured with that, and then you toured being a busker, and then you did comedy, and then you run stand-up comedy gigs. So it seems like being in front of crowds is something which has been an element in most of your adult life, right?
Yes, and the want for that has been there since I can remember. Yeah, yeah.
This is the thing I'd like to get to. So you've been involved in that your entire life.
Yeah.
What it seems like. Why go on a life like this? Why?
Everything I was ever interested in was involved with stage performance, and with even in terms of watching movies, and I always wanted to be the person I was watching. Like as growing up very young, I just wanted to be that person on the stage. I wanted to be able to do that to an audience, or I wanted that attention on me. And so,
were your parents thespians or musicians? Were they into entertainment?
No.
Were they no?
No. My mum's quite musical, but not a performer. And no, I don't. There's never been a performer that I came from. Me and my brother are both performers. He's done a lot of acting, but no, it was just me. I mean, yeah, my mum was musical, I suppose, maybe even more naturally musical than I am. But my dad, no, my dad can't find a beat. No, not at all. But they were as encouraging as the average family would be. They let me at it, and they didn't tell me not to do it. They just, like, I could just see their heart breaking whenever I would come and tell them this is going to be what I am. And every time I told them, it went from I'm going to be a rock star to I'm going to be a busker. So it was never what they wanted to hear, but they kind of let it happen. And good thing too, because well, I as I said, yeah, being in a band early, I was able to kind of show off and say, look, it's like I might be arrogant about it, and I might have wasted a lot of school time by playing the guitar, but here I am doing what I love. And okay, so I kid a little bit about the money. We didn't make much, but it was certainly enough to continue doing it and say, well, let's work harder.
Let's hone in on the beginning bit. And so you're talking about wasting a lot of time playing guitar. And so is this really your into the performer's life, is picking up a guitar?
Picking up a guitar. I used to go up, so I'm from Dublin, grew up there, and in summers we would go up to Donegal, where my dad is from, up north of Ireland. It's not in the north, it's the Republic, but we won't go there. And I used to go up there, and I remember one year he put on a Meatloaf cassette, and that was me hooked on Meatloaf, and slightly heavier music than what I knew up till that point. And I grew up watching musicals and stuff. I grew up Gene Kelly. I think the first memory I have of laughing uncontrollably at a comic routine was Donald O'Connor in Singing in the Rain doing the Make Him Laugh routine, and I was fascinated by all that kind of stuff. And then Meatloaf was put on, and that still to this day he's my favorite artist. So both because of the attitude he brought to the live shows. When I watched that when I very, very young, watched like 10 or 11 years old, watching footage of Meatloaf on stage, and then picking up a Metallica CD. And the only reason I picked up a Metallica CD was because it was always right next to the Meatloaf CD in the shop. And that was the only reason. I was like, I just kept seeing it, and like I picked up Reload first, and I bought that, and then that was it. I needed to get myself a guitar, because then I was open to watching the live footage of that and the attitude and the energy from the crowd, and I was just like, whoa, what is this? That was a whole breath of fresh air, and it was like, wow. And then, okay, so all I have to do is practice more than anybody else, and I can do this. Okay.
And is that what you thought? Is that literally a thought process?
That's
if I spend more time,
yeah. I've, as an adult looking back, that's kind of my attitude. I started playing guitar minimum 4 hours a day when I was 17. I did that for 5 or 6 years straight. Yeah. So I would, so I joined a band when I was 17. I was bass player in the band. And so they needed a bassist for a period of time because they were in between bassists and they had a gig coming up. And Steve, the drummer I was in school with, knew, oh, well, there's a guy at school. He's a bit of a weirdo. All he does is play guitar all day and sit there in class like this and not get much done. And well, we'll ask him. And I was into heavy music. It was a very much a pop punk band back then, and I liked that too. I was into all of it, and so the bass was an easy progression. I wasn't a very good bassist. I could play well, but I wasn't, the way the bass works, I didn't really know that well. But I picked it up pretty quick because once I was in a band, that was it. I didn't really. It would have been nice to be the guitarist, but it wasn't as important to me. I just wanted to get on stage and figure out the performing side to it as quick as possible. Because all the technical stuff, I knew that. So let's go. Let's get in front of these crowds and see what we can do.
And what was the first experience like for you of going and joining the band? Were they open? Was it a welcome environment?
Oh yeah,
Were you nervous?
It was silly. It was always very, very. You can imagine it's like we're pop punk, and the first gig we did was in front of maybe 400 people, and it was a very successful all ages gig that was on around. At that time, I would have only been in Dublin, but they branched out. It was a company. It was a club called Blast, and the record company was called Treasure Rhino Records, set up by this guy Robert Stevenson. And he would deal with a few bands, and he would put money behind a few bands to get them a record and compilations. And it was a smart idea. He would release it through this release information through the schools around the country. And so for these all ages non-alcoholic events, because back then there was very little to do. I mean, very little internet going on, and there wasn't that scene. And in schools there was much more. Everyone had much more of their group. Like, remember, growing up, you had the rockers and you had the punks, and they were separate. Now they're kind of connected, but they were separate back in the day. And so whatever you were into, it was easier to promote something that was coming up because you just knew your target demographic. And so every gig we did with this Blast club was very, very busy. So if you got a good billing on that, then it was just great reach for your band's name. So we kind of lucked out there because we were the right age too. A lot of the other bands were older than the kids, and so we kind of fit in. We were a little bit older than the majority, but so we fit in with that too. However, it would kind of, in Ireland, it kind of later on bit us on the ass because we were way too heavy for the college scene, which we should have been progressing into, I feel. And nor do we want to, because we were crazy on stage. And so the younger crowd just opened themselves up more to that. But we weren't heavy enough for the young crowd to really take over there either. So we're kind of in the middle. Because the pop punk we were doing was just that pop punk. But as we grew up, it did calm down and it got more rock, and we kind of were somewhere between Muse and Stereophonics type of thing. So it really matured. The sound matured a lot, and but I mean, we were still like, of when I started to develop some fire tricks and all. We were spitting the fire off the stage, and coming on in coffins, being brought on in coffins and stuff with our wirelesses and jumping into the crowd and all. So that was the element of fun. And I think when I look back at the band now, it's just good memories. Although we had, it was just a nightmare after a nightmare, but all we did was laugh. Now, I mean, nightmare in terms of money, and a big gig would be coming up on like a 4-week or 6-week tour, and all of pretty much nearly 80% of the money you make on a tour would rely on one gig. The gig gets cancelled. All of a sudden, you have all these people to pay, that kind of thing. It's like, how the hell are we going to? So then you come off a tour in debt, and then you're working more gigs to pay off a tour you've already done. Meanwhile, you're trying to get back into recording to get the next thing out, because the gigs were well attended. So you want to go back, and you don't want to blacklist anyone. And it was a constant money stress, even though, and then it's like, you're earning very, very little.
Can we touch, how did that, I was going to say, how did it begin? But obviously it begins with the first gig. But how do you become successful in the circuit? How does it come to the point of touring and touring with people, as opposed to going around your local area begging for gigs?
We did the last tours quite a bit, and off the back of that, like, I'm going to say we climbed up that rank from the Treasure Island thing very, very quickly. We were, from the get-go, we were weirdly professional. We were taking our music, although we had the scene, we made it look crazy, and we made it look very fun, but our instruments and the way we conducted ourselves in rehearsals and how we went about getting the gigs, and even down as far as like, what are we going to wear on stage, what's it going to look like, and we choreographed our jumps, and we went to town on it. Like, we had it polished. So whenever we would have the stickers for all the amps that we were put on people's amps, no matter who we were supporting, just bold, just doing it. It's like, this is our gig now. When we're on the stage, it's our gig. And that paid off, because, the songs might have been a little silly at times, but the sound was great. We spent a lot of money on our equipment. We had the best stuff. We just had good ideas for stage, and we took it very seriously. We rehearsed a lot. Like, and a day of rehearsing would be 8 hours. And we did that. Any chance we got, we were rehearsing and taking it very serious. And we all love to play live and coming up with these different tricks we can do live. And so I don't remember ever kind of going, who's going to give us a gig? There was always a gig. And maybe that's not entirely true, but certainly from my memory, it was always like, yeah, we got another thing coming up. There was always something coming up. There was always a string of gigs coming up. And then we were offered our first record, our first album from Treasure Island Records, and we were in the studio, and then we released that and toured again pretty heavy in Ireland. And then it was a gig exchange which got us over to Europe, which got us over to Germany. Was a simple gig exchange on MySpace. It was on
gig
MySpace.
exchange.
So I got in contact with a band called the Heiderouges, and they're a Dutch band, and so they would come over to Ireland and support us, and we would then go over to Germany and Holland and support them. And so gig exchange. So we pay for them to come over the first time and put them up, and then they do the same for us. And they were a lot bigger than we were, so it just turned out, yeah, they've been going a long time. Great band. So we played in front of a sold-out Rugweg in Amsterdam. That was, I'm going to say it's about 2,500 people. That was our opening night to be over there, and that was lovely. And then the gigs after that weren't that big, but there were still 600 or 700 people, and that was like, I mean, that I no one could talk to me down. I was like, oh, I've done it now. This is us around. That was the first ever tour.
Well, this was my question: was there a moment at this point where you felt like you made it? And it obviously sounds like there was.
Yeah, that was like, that was kind of it. Although we knew, it's like we were aware that we weren't in a position where it's like, okay, so no label, because the deal we did with Treasure Island was that they weren't their label. They were helping us out with this album, and we did a deal with them. So we still weren't signed. And I think that was due to, we didn't want to be signed by them because they were in Ireland. And it was me that got the gig exchange. And then so we went over to Europe. We were kind of shipping around for labels, and we were in two minds if we even wanted it, because we're like, well, we're here now, so maybe keep pushing, or do we want to look for labels and go down that road? We were kind of confused about that. And yeah, I mean, later on, that would be one of the things that made me think I didn't want to be in a band. Way down the road, years later, when I started thinking I wasn't going to be in a band, was to do with the labels, because they started.
Well, let's focus at least now on touring Germany in the Dam. And so, how does it go from there?
That was the best point in the band. That was a lot of fun. So it goes. We did a lot of support. We did our own tours, mainly our own headline spots, and every now and then there'll be a band that we would support that were bigger than us. And then one band in particular, Uncompromising from Mars, we got friendly with, and we ended up going around a lot of places with them. They were a French band, around France and Germany mainly, in any city you can name. And then we hit a few of the other places too, Austria and Luxembourg and stuff. We hit that with them. And then off the back of that, we got a few more people coming down to see us on our own. Now, around our European tours would be in front of about, 150 to, rarely 400 people. But usually, like, when I say 150, they're cramming 150 people into a place that holds 70, and people have to literally stage dive and be kept up over the crowd to stay in the room. It's just craziness, and that was nothing but fun. That was nothing, like, we all wanted it so bad, and we were all so happy. We felt very fortunate to be there. That we took full advantage of the madness and the shows, and yeah. But
what
yet again,
what was the struggles at this time? What were you guys finding really hard at this time?
The struggles at this time. No, I was already doing the street at this time. I was already I was already doing all that. I was already doing the magic and stuff. The struggles at this time, well, we'd go back home and we'd have to record. We enjoyed recording, but there was I suppose, the life in Ireland and then on the road around Germany. And at that period of time, we weren't really gigging. Once we went over to Germany and Europe, we weren't really gigging in Ireland all that much. We would do a little bit of a warm-up thing. And then now we're 24, 25. I was 24, 25. We couldn't really go back and do that all ages gig. That was we weren't interested in that. And so we would turn up rarely and do these kind of club gigs for the kind of college gig going crowd. And they didn't like us. We were just too heavy for them. Even though our stage show had calmed down a little bit, but we were still way too crazy. So, but struggles, yet again, I'll only say financial struggles. But nothing that was going to stop the band. Like, we were still having a good time. And now, okay, so I'll tell you, I'll tell a story that is always shocks people when I tell it, and it's quite crazy. And there comes a time when it happened to me. There came a time in my life when I knew I just couldn't really be in the band anymore. And we'll get to that later on. But I don't hold this against the person at all. But the founder of the band and the singer, the front man of the band, we had kind of two vocalists at that time, but the main vocalist, who was on all the songs, was having second thoughts if he wanted to be in a band or not. And the time and the way he decided to let us know was by not turning up to the airport for a 5-week-long tour around Europe. And on top of that, we had just released, like, I think it's close to about 30,000 copies of our new album on the front cover of a German magazine. So we turn up to all these venues, and the booker is like, "Where's this guy?" Showing us, where's this? Like, he was a short dude, mad spiky hair, and it's like, and he's, it's clearly not any of us. And it's like the songs are all different. We literally had to write the songs so they were a 3-piece song on the flight over. We were like, okay, well, that section, I'll do that in the bass, you do that, we'll cut that bit out, we'll go into this bit, that, and so we remade a set on the plane over. And that was actually ended up being a very good tour, but we were blacklisted by some of the venues that we were lucky enough to get off the back of some previous tours. And I've,
they blacklisted you because it was sale of false goods kind of thing.
Yeah, the sound wasn't there. They thought they were I felt some of the venues were doing it kind of because they thought, well, I don't need to pay them full amount now, even though the show was great. But, you know, and fair enough, because, you know, if I booked a band and two of them turn up, I'm like, well, what's going on? You're missing your singer. It's not like if I didn't sing, so if there was a different bass player and all the songs sound the same, no one's really, the booker's not going to mind. But the songs sound the same, and some songs just aren't there. You know, songs that you would, you know, they're not on the album. Like 3 songs from the album are played and stuff. And it's like, oh, well, our singer left. Well, when did he leave? Why didn't you tell me? Well, he left like day we were leaving it for the tour. It was all very confusing, and people thinking we're lying to them, or yeah, it was a bizarre time. But I remember having a great time on the tour, but because touring, we just loved it so much. We just, at that stage, it's all we wanted to do. Coming back was
why do you love it so much?
Why did I love it so much? That's interesting. Well, the gig, it kind of speaks for itself. I got to do what I always wanted to do in dirty, grungy places, in lovely venues. I just got to play music and jump around with my friends and experience this. And then the whole thing, why did I love it? We loved the kind of grind of it. We kind of loved, you know, getting to a gig stinking from last night. And because, you know, most of the times you're traveling 8 or 9 hours a day in a van. So, you know, you just kind of party and then you get in the van and then you're gone again. And you're lucky if the place you're staying that night has a shower. And if it doesn't, you're gone again. And so we liked that for the time. Would I go back and do it now? Let's say, I wouldn't do it now. It's a younger person's thing, and you know, there was a lot of party too. There was a lot of drink. I mean, it was every night was a huge party, and if I did it now, I just wouldn't be able to. I just physically wouldn't be able to have that kind of energy, and yeah, nor to want to have that energy. But for the time, we just loved the chaos, and we were so welcomed in the venues that we kind of started to try and see what we could do in order to be told to stop by the booker or by someone. We were kind of like at one time, at one gig in particular in the middle of nowhere in Germany, just mountains around us. We were kind of pushing each other, okay, you do that, and we'll see if he tells us to stop. And this was like a quiet pub, and it resulted in the drummer, Stephen, climbing up the rafters of this pub and walking across, balancing on this thin platform and pissing on the bar. And instead of being told off, the barman started catching it in loads of pints, empty pints, laughing as the piss is bouncing off the bottom of the glass and just spraying all over the room. And I'm just looking, me and Stephen are just on too many Jägermeisters looking at each other going, what do we need to do? So if you tell me why I loved it so much, that sums it up in maybe a too honest way, but it was madness. The gigs were great, and then after the gigs, we went for it.
Now, you say that you were doing street shows this time, so I kind of want to ask you about the street shows, but I fear that it might become difficult with too many things going on. So what I'm probably going to do is let's finish the story off about the band, and then we'll move on to the street stuff, even though I know that it's concurrent now. So this sounds amazing. Why not spend the rest of your life doing this? Why stop? Why would one not want to do the thing they love?
So, yeah, very, very interesting question. I've thought about this a lot, and so all that's happening, and we're now a 3-piece, and the music is changing. Now, when the original singer was in the band, we were a 4-piece. It was kind of, even though there's no doubt we were all very well connected and we all helped each other get through a lot, but it was me and the singer, the guy who left, and then the drummer and the other singer. And that was like, if you had to separate us, that was the way it was separated. And so when he left, like, well, the leader of the pack was, because I always believe when you're in any kind of a group, there's a leader, and you have to go along with the leader. You have to know your role, and I was very happy to do that because the leader of our pack, the guy who stepped in to be frontman, is, well, I mean, he's nothing but talented, and he was excellent, and he had a great future for the band. However, that future was get the record deal and become the biggest band ever. He had a huge drive for that. And during Europe, it was obvious that we weren't going to get there continuing on around that circuit. And I was very happy to continue on around that circuit. And I knew getting a record deal would mean go back to Ireland and try and get one there, or go someplace else that didn't really appeal to me. Now, it meant, and after a while, we did go back to Ireland, and Europe was still in the cards, but we were like, it was time to kind of go, okay, where is it going? Do we want to be, you know, well, at that time, saying going into your 30s was a big deal, you know? So do we want to be going into our 30s still doing that? And then that's just it. And, you know, then it was kind of just spoken about, and they wanted to go in a different direction. And this wasn't the end of me in the band at all. I would stay on going for quite some time, a few years. I don't exactly know when our last tour of Europe was. I'm sorry, I should have figured that out. But I don't exactly know what year it was. But I would come back down to Ireland and be doing the street again. And then a few years later, after another album, they would announce that they were going over to LA. And that just didn't appeal to me at all. Because I knew what LA would be. It would be no street performing, and it would be meetings, and you'd do the gig, but it'd be just, and then another thing was, oh, we'll just get a job and support the band. And I'm like, I'm out. Now it wasn't as quick as that. It wasn't as quick. It was like, it was a beginning, and it was a slow burn. But yet again, just as I said earlier on, you have to back up the ideas of your leader. I also think when it comes to anything, if you're not in 100%, certainly anything creative, because I can only speak to anything creative because it's all I've done. But if you're not into it 100%, then if you're into it 95%, get out. Certainly in a band, because if you're not into 100%, if you don't absolutely, like, if the band want the record deal and want to be the biggest band in the world, and you don't believe in that, well, then you're pulling them back. You're wasting their time. And so maybe even after a little longer than that, because it was a big deal, I eventually, we met up, and it was like, I'm out. I'm not doing the LA thing, and that was cool. It was
amicable.
It was like I just told them, and that was cool. It was weird, but and I have to say, as soon as I left the band, it was very weird. I didn't expect it. As soon as I left the band, I didn't regret leaving, and I didn't miss it. I went just like that. I didn't, like, I've got so many fond memories, and I'm still in contact with them today, and we're all very good. But I don't actually, there was never been a moment where I thought, oh, I wish I was still on tour. Not even like back in Europe, because I kind of felt when I was there, I made sure I got it out of my system. You know, I took advantage of everything I could, and I learned as much as I could from it. And yeah, it was an incredible amount of fun. And then when I left. So yeah, and then that
Fair
was
enough.
it.
And suppose to flesh this story out more, then we'll talk about the thing that you were doing, which you moved to, or at least concentrate on more after this. So when did you start busking? What year was it?
I started busking. I looked before, when I knew I was going to come on the podcast, I was like, you know what I'll do? I'll look up the moment when I first met my first street performer. First person I ever met doing street performing was Owen Lean. And he was in college in Dublin. And it was the 2nd of December, 2003. was my first time to meet him, not to do street performing. And the reason I know that was because I forget her name now, but I bought this girl that I was trying to impress tickets for Iron Maiden. And I looked up when that gig was, and it was on the 1st of December 2003. And I remember after that gig, the next day, we're out getting breakfast, and she sees a guy on Grafton Street in Dublin, the main high street, shuffling cards and going up to people. And we went up, and I lied to him. I just told him I could do magic. I think I did it to impress her. I don't really know why. I had an interest in magic. I loved watching magic and stuff. I was always interested in, as I said, nearly all things performance. And he was just, well, Owen's one of the nicest guys you could meet. And I think I could do one card trick. And he says, let's meet up and we'll discuss magic. And we did. We met up in a pub a couple of days later, and he just showed me all these cool card tricks. And then pretty instantly I was hooked. Got myself a deck of cards, and I was just practicing. And it was Owen's encouragement that took me out to the street. At that time, he was just doing hit and run with the cards. And when I started, he went up to doing a table show with magic, and I was doing the hit and run with the cards. And he kind of trained me in to do that, how to do that. And of course, it was terrible. And of course, it took me a long time to actually have the guts to do it. And very, very soon, I was like, well, this isn't working. I just feel like I'm embarrassing myself.
Well, before we go on, so you got the cards. Did you learn a few simple tricks to begin with?
Yeah. I just went mental at that. Then that was what took over. Then just practicing cards, and of course
So you spend a few months practicing the cards and then try and do tables with it, or is it more immediate?
No, it was more. I wasn't working as a performer. It was still the band that was working at. I wasn't booked as the performer for anything. My first actual gig for magic would have been a juggling gig, which means that was about, I'm going to say that was close to a year after I met Owen. And I probably wasn't even still, I wouldn't be still even call myself a street performer then. I'm going to guess it was 2004 when I did my first show. So it's probably a year later, because there was a long period of, like, now when I say show, I mean a show. I mean like an attempt at a circle show, like where, you know, beginning, middle, and end, get a crowd and have them at the end. So that would have been a year later. But there was a period of maybe 3 or 4 months where I'd put my school bag on the ground with props in it, look around and go, no, I'll walk over here and see if I can do it. And I was just nervous. You know, it was my street that I grew up in. So anytime I'm on that street, I would see someone from school, or I'd see someone I know, which meant that if I'm standing there trying to get people to look at me, someone's going to walk by that knows me. So I kind of always felt that, like, I wish I should have just gotten a bus and did it somewhere else. It would have been a lot easier. But seeing the people you knew all the time, even in Dublin, it's like people have the illusion that it's a big city. It's really not. Every time you go into town, everyone walks up one street. Now, it makes that street very busy and good to do shows on, but you're going to see someone you know every single time. Maybe every show some days. So it took a while for me to have the guts to just go, you know what, it's going to fail. Actually, if I don't say it often, but it was red wine that got me to do my first show. I had a couple of glasses of red wine, and I was walking down the street. I remember it very well, actually, walking in the street on my route to a juggling club that was on in one of the colleges. I was going to just buzz in and see what's going on there. And I was with a couple of mates, and I was like, because I was with them and the energy was good and we're all joking around, I was like, I got my stuff. I'm just going to do something. Just do it, because I know if I do it a little bit drunk and just with friends, it doesn't matter, and it means so much to me, because I know then I've done something. And they don't even know I'm going to be I want to be a street performer. So to them, it's just, oh, Gary's just doing something stupid in the street. So it worked out in my favor. And I got to the end of the show, and I was like, well, that's me then. And then the fear kind of went away pretty quick.
What did you do in the show?
Okay, so that show was, I had Diablo with me. I don't know what I didn't do much with the Diablo. So if anyone's watching who doesn't know what the Diablo is, it's the two pieces of sticks and there's a string in the middle. There's an egg cup thing. You've all seen it done before, and you balance it. And I don't remember what my trick was. I just remember being in front of the crowd with it. I presume it's probably just a high throw or something. If maybe I would be lucky to even have pulled off that. I don't know. And then I did a bit of juggling. I did a card trick, and then I did an arm kind of contortion routine. that myself and Owen kind of made up. That, you know, I was very, very skinny teenager, and I still kind of am a skinny dude, but I was a very scrawny teenager, and I'm double jointed, and I can do these weird things with my arms. And so when I showed Owen this, when he took me out for that card session, I showed him this, and he was like, "That's amazing," and he was able to kind of choreograph with me a pretty cool routine, something that had a kind of a story to tell and a couple of lines, and so I did that. So it was all over the place. It was just, yeah. I think I made €14. I think I made €14 on my first show. I remember saying that years ago, and then that was enough for me. I was like, okay, here we go. Let's dive into this now. And so the reasoning in which it was important to get a different thing other than the band was, one, because I wanted more performance time, and I was fascinated by the idea of going out to the street, and it just seemed like an impossible thing. There was only one regular street performer in Ireland at that time, and that was Dave McSavage, who I would watch a lot, and I think he might be the best I've ever seen. But really, there was very few performers traveling to Dublin, and I only really got to know them and to see their show when I started doing street performing. Before that, I don't remember seeing any of them really. Maybe I just wasn't around or something. And so I was fascinated by the idea of going out to the street and having a show and entertaining people. That was crazy to me. So I wanted to figure out how to do that. And on the other hand, it was really handy for the band, because now I can, you know, all the money that we get from the band can go straight back into the band. I can fund myself with this other thing that's still just as, you know, creative, and, you know, as I can still perform, and I can better my on-stage performance through this. So very, very quickly I became the talker in the band, because I was just getting very, very, you know, the amount of time we can spend on the street, even if you only do 2 shows. Like, yeah. Now, of course, there was no microphones I was using back then. It was just me, hair really long, everything just thrown around, and I had no clue what I was doing. But so I had no one to learn from on the street with the circle. Myself and Owen were coming up, but that was kind of also fine, because what I lost in having a great circle show around, I gained in having time to myself. There was no one busking. I could just go any day. And I didn't know that weekdays weren't good. You want to work weekends. I didn't know the top pitch is going to be better than this alleyway next to a bin. I didn't know any of that. I've gone into the street, and as soon as I get over the fear, as soon as on the honeymoon page, I just put my stuff down, screamed out, and just got a crowd and had a laugh. And if it was successful, it was, and if it wasn't, it wasn't. Then I just got on to the next show. And so it was fun in the band, and I was getting to perform all the time. So I was performing many shows. So another thing I'll mention about the band that has a connection with the street performing, where I missed out, and where I always kind of felt a little bit like I was missing out sometimes, certainly if we stayed in Ireland throughout the summer. So obviously the summer is just the golden months on the street, being such a seasonal job. And then August would come around, and I'd hear about this Edinburgh Fringe happening, and I never got to go, because, you know, I remember one time not getting to go because we were doing a couple of gigs around Ireland, and I remember those gigs being real sucky. I remember them just not being they weren't awful, but it was like I kind of felt that had I said to the guys, here, look, I'm going to go over here, it really wouldn't have mattered. And there I missed out this big festival, and it would have been so, you know, I was never able to do a massive run during the summer, because, you know, rehearsals, and then I'd go down the country and rehearse somewhere and stay over. So it's costing a lot of money, and then getting back and missing out majority of good times. Yeah. And then once I got settled into the street performing, and once I started to figure out a little bit more, naturally you start to work the better areas, and you only work the better days. I was certainly, I know you work a lot more pitches than I would, and on different days, but I know I certainly fit into the mold of, well, Saturday and Sunday I'm working, and I didn't work. I worked any day the schools were off, I was working. But if the schools were on, I didn't work on the street. And then that was funding myself. I moved away from home when I was 19, so that was funding myself all the way through.
Why do you think you chose to do that? Why did you chose to? And I assume work in the busy times, weekends and children's holidays are the busiest times. So there's the most amount of people. But is there anything more than just making life easy?
You can, like in Dublin, you can work during the school term, but it's not fun, and you're not like going to earn all that much. I mean, you might have a good show, but the next show you might not get a crowd because it's just so quiet. It's just, you don't get the tourists, and really in Ireland you want the Irish people. They're just not there, and if they come by you and see you on a Tuesday and don't stop, they're not going to stop on a Saturday because you're just there all the time. And I don't know, and I know this to be true because I've seen so many performers since I started doing it come, and yet they can get a show, but the majority of people watching the shows are kids mitching off school in their uniforms, egging each other on to interrupt the show in a funny way, because Dublin's just rough. So and you see these street performers turn up who are some of them are great performers, but it's like they're on the wrong street, or it's like they pick out the wrong volunteer, just because a lot of times, certainly the Americans. I remember Eric Evans telling me he picked out the wrong volunteer in his show, and everyone just walked away. And I was like, you just picked the wrong guy. This guy had a nagging of vodka in his back pocket. It was just you just don't pick this guy to hold the ball for your, and as beautiful as a magician he is, he was just telling me honestly how there's trouble obviously everywhere he goes, but they just weren't used to seeing Irish kids. They just weren't used to seeing that kind of thing. You get it in Scotland as well. See, it's the same pitch. I think like Glasgow and Dublin, pretty much the exact same pitch. And I kind of like that.
Working class people, yes, it's the working class kids that come to the shows.
Everyone comes to the shows, but it's certainly the working class that are there. I wouldn't.
I mean, the reason you say it's
I wouldn't say just working class. I would just say any group of, because you do get that, but certainly you have the opposite to it too, because a lot of the schools that are situated in town are certainly not working class people. If anything, some of them might even be the upper class, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's like you get any kid from any school in their school. Now I'm talking school uniforms, so I'm thinking like these kids are like 12 and 13. I'm not talking like the secondary where they just won't be interested. But like the
teenagers,
the real young teenagers who are and you get 11 of them around, and they all stop to watch the show. And like I don't think it was a working class thing. I think it's just being a kid. It's like, I don't really like what this guy's doing. Let's ruin it. And I can ruin it in front of all my friends, and I get a big pop, and everything is, and then we walk off, and then so I've just seen that happen an awful lot. But in terms of the wrong people to pick out, well, that was just unfortunate people. Like in the way the pitch is in Dublin is it's right next to Stephen's Green, and all the drug addicts go in there and they shoot up in the green. And every now and then the park security comes and moves them off. And whenever they move off, they come onto Grafton Street. And if you're top pitch and you're in the middle of a show, they don't realize, but they just walk in. And I've seen it happen countless times. They just walk in, and all of a sudden there's 200 people around them, and there's a guy here, and they're just going to mess with you. And actually, a lot of time, they're decent, they're nice people, but if you don't know how to play it with them, they're not going anywhere because they're having too much fun. And certainly if you're from out of town, if because you can imagine sometimes the performer might be in a very colored costume or something and have an American twang in the accent. These guys, high on gear, they're just going to have a good time, as we all would. But so there's a lot of that in Dublin. But so you got to be able to roll with the punches and know that you might be in a great show now, but any second now, someone might come down the street and that's now your show. And the Irish audience are used to it enough that you can absolutely play with it, and it can be a lovely part of your show. And then the guy, when he knows that he's not going to get one over on you, and he's had a bit of time with you, and you've gave it back to him, but also not crossed the line, they'll usually go away. Usually, but and that's fine. But you got to know that they're not out to. It's not aggressive. If you get aggressive with them, then it's game over.
So it's your classic helpful hecklers that they'll be there. They want to play with you. If you play back with them, they'll go with you and they'll allow it. Yeah. So you were saying about Edinburgh. You were saying you missed Edinburgh.
I missed going over to. I never got to see Edinburgh. I would go when I left a band, because as soon as I left a band, I was like, okay, what's my goal here with the street performing? And my love for the street performing was growing all the time too. As soon as I left the band, I was like, okay, well, maybe the street performing can take me someplace else. And I was also changing my show up an awful lot too. I would change my show every 3 years. And that was kind of a rule I had on myself, that I was always going to change it up. And every time I changed it up, I started from absolute scratch. I would go around.
Why do you have that rule? Why makes it rule?
I get bored. I really liked the thrill and learning something. I always found it very easy to lock myself away and practice the same thing over and over again until it's right. And I think the reason I was like that was because even growing up, I kind of developed this attitude that I don't have responsibilities that the majority of people have. I've kind of turned my back on a lot of those responsibilities. All I have to do is prove myself in performance, and I earn a nice amount, and I understand how to celebrate it. Therefore, if I can live like this and not have much responsibilities and just do what I love to do, well, then I better be damn good at it. I better give the people who were stopping to either come to my shows or to stop and watch me in the street, I better give them the best that I have. If I say I'm going to do something, I want it to be really, really good. And obviously, to my own standard, I want to leave every show figuring I did something brilliant there. And the same goes for getting bored. I need to feel a thrill. I need to feel like, every show, there's some element of play that I enjoyed as well. And I haven't always been, on point with that. Sometimes I found myself kind of, and we've all done it as performers. You're in the middle of a show and you're thinking about what you're having for dinner that night. You're just not there. You're kind of thinking it might be show number 2 or 3 that day, and you're just thinking, oh yeah. And then you get to the end of a show and you realize, oh, this is still on. And I'm like, I really hate that feeling. I'm like, if I'm not even going to be present in my mind during a performance where people are giving their time, and as I said, they've got more stresses than I do, and I'm not even paying attention to what I'm doing. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to go down that road, because there's a few performers to go down that road, and whenever you see the show, it's like, oh God. Now, to a lay person, you mightn't be. To a person watching the street show the first time, you mightn't really know that the performer is just not there, thinking about something else. But I just never wanted to be me. So I suppose that's kind of the rule. And then
it was a way to keep you on your toes.
Yeah,
to keep you on your toes. And also, something I'd just like to bring as well is it seems that you're someone who doesn't have a problem with applying yourself to achieving something. If you look at what you did with the guitar, you did 4 hours a day every day, which is more than most people did. I had a bass guitar that gathered dust in my home when I was young. You wanted to achieve something, you applied yourself to it, and it appears you did the same thing with street performance.
Yeah. It was never difficult to me. Like, I never found it hard to kind of get to the 3 hour mark and then just go, okay, another 2 hours. I just found time flew, and and then the only other thing I had, that's another thing, you see, yet again with the responsibilities. If I didn't practice whatever it was I was working on to perform, well, it was either just go and hang out with mates or, what. And there was a lot of that too, but it was like, as I said, I didn't work when the schools were on. So that's Monday to Friday, majority of the year, just practicing, or else going over to another performer's house, or, and that kind of stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to have anything to do these times, I better fill most days with making what I'm doing on the weekend that little bit better. And sometimes, and that equaled in, sometimes the shows might not be very high. It doesn't mean that the skill level was insanely high. I mean, I know I did a juggling show. I wouldn't call myself like as good of a juggler as I am a magician, even though I did juggling for technically a little bit longer. I think juggling was one of the things that I maybe do. Of all the things I do, I think juggling might be the thing I do the worst. I'm not terrible at it, but it's definitely the thing I do the worst. It's also the thing I found was hardest to learn. I thought once I got to about 5 balls with juggling, I'm like, oh god, this is brutal. It just gets so difficult. And then of course
the amount of time becomes insane, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, and it's so physical. It's like when you're practicing 6 balls and you drop all of them. That's pain in the arse. It's like, oh, here we go. And it's just that for 4 hours is like, that's tough. Rather playing with the guitar, it's like, well, if you're working on a song that's kind of driving you mad, or a scale pattern that's kind of getting to you, I can just jam something I know and get carried away with that for half an hour, and time passes very quickly. Same thing with the cards, with any magic props. Most magic props I was using was very small. I could go about and do an entire day around town hanging out with mates with a deck of cards in my hand, and I did. I was that person, and just shuffled a deck of cards. And if someone looked over at me a little bit weird, I was like, oh, come on over here and I'll show you this. So boom, I'm performing a routine. And that I would have been annoying to hang around with, but it didn't bother me. I was like, oh, well, I have to get good. I have to get good.
And I suppose you get the feedback from that. From doing a magic trick to someone, you've got feedback. You've got this person enjoying it. With music, you have feedback. You have the sound that you're creating, which you can enjoy. Juggling, do you have that same feedback training? Some jugglers might say, yes, of course I do. But I can empathize if you say, you didn't.
Yeah, I just found it. I found it difficult, and even at I just found that with juggling, like I didn't feel I ever knew the set, like my where I'm at with it. Like I could do a real like maybe I could do 5 balls for a while, or very impressive tricks with 3 and 4, but I never knew. Okay, so what stage is this? Whether it's something else, I was kind of easy able to connect it to something else. And say, well, I'm here now. But with juggling, I'm like, and I could have bad days with juggling. With juggling, that's what drives me mental. I can't have a bad day playing the guitar. It's just a guitar. You tune it up and you play. But with juggling, sometimes I go out to the street and I'm juggling the clubs, and I'm like, I can't really do this today. It's that drives me mad as well. And also it comes from what I said at the very beginning was very true too. As I said, growing up, I wanted to be that person performing on the stage. So now you have me years later sharing the pitch with other people, and I would see someone do something and I thought, that's cool. So every time I saw someone did, like, they're doing this, it's like, oh, well, I wonder if I could have my own version of that. And then I would go and do that thing. And there was other reasons to why I changed the show too. It wasn't always that. There was one reason.
So, what was the first show?
First actual show the first proper show would have been, get this in the right order now. It would have been juggling knives. It would have been juggling knives, doing that arm routine that I was talking about, the contortionist, and then juggling knives and doing tricks with that, and the blockhead. So the hammering the nail into the nose. I did that for a long time, and actually, I'm very proud of the block. Yeah.
Sorry, you carry on, mate. I apologize.
Yeah. Just I'll mention the blockhead routine because it is something I'm very, very proud of, and it came to be because of one of those people that we just discussed earlier on, who would come into the show and ruin it with way too much drink on them. And there's one guy in particular who used to always turn up every time I'd be hammering the nail into my nose. Before I would do it, every time he would say, "Let me do it, let me do it, let me do it," shouting into the show. And I would always kind of calm it down, and then spend a bit of time talking back to him. He gets his spotlight, and then and he was nice. He was drunk out of his head, but he was one of the nice ones. And one time, I said yeah, because I'd known him. I'm talking like 3 months in. And I'd speak to him on the street outside of shows, and he was always drunk and he's always screaming at people. But I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna control the situation, but I'm gonna give him the hammer and I'm gonna see what he does. And as soon as I gave him the hammer, he was whispering, I don't want to do it. Are you all right? I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you. And I could see over his shoulder, everyone in the audience is just like, and I'm like, oh, I got them now. This is interesting. And then from that moment on, I had a member of the a volunteer up to hold a hammer and hammer it into my nose every single show I did, and was very proud of that routine because it opened up a whole other thing. Because I would give them the nail, they would take it. Well, I give them the bag of nails. They would take a nail out of the bag. They would hold it. They would hold it, and I would start putting it in my nose, and then they would open the box and take out the hammer. And of course, when the hammer's seen, that's the moment, right? So that would just get the huge gasp or the cheer or the shock or the face covering. And I was like, oh, that's as you know, that's a nice one when you really get that good feeling. And actually, funny enough, another performer who also books for like events like the Teddy Bears Picnic and all these young kid things, he saw it and he comes to me. Johnny Fielding's his name, great performer, great booker, all around great guy, and he said this idea. I think you could pull off the Teddy Bears Picnic and children's events as long as they take the family with the kind of freaky stuff you're doing, because you don't display it like a shock factor. It's a funny routine. It's a silly routine. And so we demoed it, we tried it, and it was successful. I was performing these freaky shows at the Teddy Bears Picnic and stuff off the back of that. So that was a lot of fun too. That was a bizarre one.
It sounds interesting, and believe it or not, I think the same thing. Freak show is strangely transportable into a family show, kids show kind of environment. As long as you play fun, as long as you're not playing it dark and sinister.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
You talked about writing that routine. Essentially, that's what you're saying, is that these things happened, and because of those circumstances, you created this routine. And I was just interested in the creation of the first show and how you created shows after that. How did you come to write the first show? Was it just giving it a go, or did you watch the shows and try and?
It was give it a go. It was definitely give it a go. There's an old photo somewhere. I saw a photo of one of my first shows a little while ago now, but I can tell by looking at me in that picture that I'm just screaming, and I didn't have much jokes. I was always more interested in performance than the actual material, than the actual bits, I would say, because I kind of believe at this stage now I can kind of get a laugh even if the joke doesn't get a laugh. And I kind of understood kind of early on, I kind of started to go, well, it doesn't matter what I say. If I do this in this way, I can probably get a laugh. If my joke doesn't work this way, I can get a laugh for being an idiot thinking it's funny. Or if it doesn't work this way, I can get a laugh for being an idiot because I'm too energetic, or just something I can do after hearing silence that, and more on that later if we have the time. But that would come to bite me in the ass when I started stand-up for the first time. But we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, so the beginning, no structure, craziness. The shows were about, I'm going to say, 18 minutes long on average. So, quick shows. I would get through it. And it was that design that was like as long as I could do. I was trying to keep them there for long. And then I would move on to the fire. I just pretty much replaced the knife juggling to the fire juggling, which meant for a lot more time to have those props involved, because I just felt that I could get more comedy and more silliness out of the fire. So I bring in the volunteer and get him to light the flames. Very basic stuff. And it's kind of interesting because some of the things I was doing, I would then kind of see other people do, and they're just stock things. But I suppose that's kind of the reason they're stock. They're just so obvious how you would, if you're going to become a performer, how you go about it. And then I was, I do that. But I was like, yeah, but everyone does that. It's not, it's just what you would do. And I want to make another point actually as well. That was connected to being in the band. A lot of me in the band was, certainly at the beginning, was acting like I'm a rock star. Remember, I was telling you about, we used to choreograph our jumps, and we used to figure out what we're going to wear in the band. Well, we would go on stage acting like we're the biggest thing you've ever seen. It doesn't matter what venue it was. We're like, we are rock stars. We would walk in sunglasses, the whole dickhead thing. We were rock stars. And so I took that attitude to the street, because I was like, once I got over the fear, I was the opposite. I was like, okay, well, now I'm the most confident person ever. I'm shouting, you gotta watch this. This is amazing. So it wasn't like, because now, certainly on the comedy scene, when I'm trying to help out people performing, it's all about, what should I say? How should I stand? And I'm like, well, I was the opposite. I was starting going, like, my whole body language was like, this is the best thing you're going to see. And I learned that from acting on the stage. Just faking it, just acting like a rock star. And then it's kind of still the way I just go on with confidence. I think street performers are all like that a little bit, because you have to dive in the deep end when you do a street show. You don't have the opportunity to start off small and go, oh, this might work here. It's like, you just have to go for it. Your first line has to be like announcing yourself that you're here. In whatever way your performing persona works, but it's not a shy start to anything, certainly not on the street when you're trying to get their attention. So that was a huge thing too at the very beginning. And then afterwards, I was aware of some of the stock lines, and I always liked using stock lines. And then I would mix. I see a comment from Tommy. That's how I start my show. Lovely stuff. Nice one, Tommy. Good to hear from him. And so I never had a problem using the stock lines on the street. I felt that I was getting the creative side of myself out on the band. And I also think that's not just an excuse. Even if I wasn't, I would still use a stock on the street. Personally, I never minded. I just think, to me, the street was always a kind of I want to earn money and I want to perform. And that was it. And if I went on stage, anytime I went on stage, I would always do my very best to create my own completely original thing. And when it came to the street, I was like, well, I got a good bit of my own stuff in there, but I also use just the stock that's there. And I know that's a conversation you can have till the sun swallows the earth, because some people think, oh, stock at some stage is written by someone and you shouldn't use it, and other people think it's fine. And to be honest, I don't care what they think. Most of the people who have a real problem with it online, they don't perform, and if they do,
So would you say the same about stand-up? Because I know that you're a big fixture in the stand-up circuit. You're in many clubs now. You're a commercial stand-up yourself. It's a very different thing in the stand-up world, right?
Absolutely. I like to say I don't believe I've ever done a stock line on stage. Certainly not in the last. Certainly not since I've started running gigs. I don't think I've ever done it. When I started into the stand-up, which I think was the end of 2016, early 2017, maybe. I think I wrote a set. Everything was written out, but it was never an issue. I never asked myself, "Am I going?" It was just so obvious. It's like, oh, if you're going to do stand-up, and I had a lot of stage experience before them. I was doing a lot of the cabarets. I would bring sometimes my street show to the stage, and I would redo it. I would repackage it so it would fit that stage. A friend of ours, Sue, who's doing a lot of work with the Westminster thing at the moment, she set up the open stage back in the day. It was a fantastic night. And she did it so that people who it wasn't just an open mic for the normal comedians. It was kind of an open mic for people with bigger shows that wanted to do new things. She encouraged every time you go on stage with your props or in burlesque, it was like, well, you don't want to do this on the thing because it's not ready yet, or your paid gig. So it was a great opportunity to go and do a big stage production. And so I just took advantage of that, and I was performing there a lot. And just, even if I wasn't going to use it, just to yet again create something that I do, because I looked at the street as, okay, well, that's a commercial way that I can make money. Well, now this is my playtime. This is just, I can be crazy with this, and I can do it backwards, or I can do it wrong, or so yeah, the street, the meaning of the street to me has always been about go out, do the best you can, get as big of a crowd, and make the money. Like I was always, it was like, to me personally, making as much money as I can. And it was never about I want to do these massive, ridiculous hats. It was just what I can do, make as much as what I can do that's realistic to my goal and realistic also to the show. Because, you know, I did the Cups and Balls for 3 years. I was never, ever going to make as much money in a Cups and Balls show, no matter how successful it was, than a very, very successful Straight Jacket show. It just doesn't work. So I was well aware of that going into the Cups and Balls, that I was going to take a dive in my earnings a little bit. But also I was like, well, it's a new thing to learn. And that was the hardest show I ever had to learn. Not learn, but perform.
Why?
Perform. Because
why was it the hardest?
Definitely by far the hardest to perform, because you have to make an audience care about props that are just uninteresting. 3 cups and 3 balls on a table, it's just not interesting. And I didn't consider that before doing it. I just thought, well, the end is there. And like in the fire, if you know you're going to do a big fireball breathing at the end of a set, or you're going to juggle a cool routine, you know that's coming, but the props are already interesting enough that something cool is going to happen. It's still fire. Well, with 3 little balls and cups on a table that people have to look down at, and they have to kind of look over people's shoulders to see, and you got a stick and you're doing these things, only you know that it's going to happen at the end. And so it's tough. And on top of that, if you know how to juggle the 7 balls or 5 balls, or you know how to get in the unicycle, the work is, even though it's hard every time and there's a level of skill every time, but you know you can do it. In magic, I love the thrill of every time. You got to prove it every time. Like if it's a large prop you're putting under the cups and under the hat at the end, well, you got to fool them every single time from all angles. Because in Dublin, and it's happened, if someone sees anything from over here, they're going to go, hey, you did this, look out for him, he's got this, and they'll just, and then, oh, now it's really on, because I really want to finish this show. and so things like that. So I just found it, like, because with a card trick, cards are just so easy to use that thrill wasn't there of tricking them every time. But the cups and balls, for me, the thrill was nearly there every single time. Personally, I've spoke to a few magicians about it, not in much detail, but I in my opinion, of all the shows I've done, the cups and balls have been the hardest to, one, get their attention, and then when you have their attention and you're annoying them with these boring 3 little balls, to redo the kicker down. Now, granted, you're so far ahead of them, but even still, it's an easy one to just mess up a little bit, and if you mess up a little bit, that's the show over, and you're not coming back from that. And actually, there's a funny story behind that too. I knew I was going to need to experience failing with the cups and balls on the street, and so I went out I knew how to do it, but I didn't practice it. I just went out and said, well, the worst it's going to be, because I'm going to flash, I'm going to expose what I'm doing all the time over the next few days. Well, then I can only then be confident in my skill level, because I've experienced what it's like to die in front of the crowd. So who cares? Let's go. Let's just do it. And I did it. And of course, someone recorded that, and it's on YouTube, and it's called The World's Worst Magician. And I'm very proud of that video. I've contacted her recently, because Owen Lean messaged me that about a week ago or something, and I contacted her just only a few days ago. So I'm still waiting on a response. But I don't even know if she still has the account or something. It's an old video now. But yeah, so anyone listening can look up I think it's called The World's Worst Magician, and it's a 13-second clip of me standing on Grafton Street, and it would have been like maybe, I don't know, show from number 1 to 5, and I can tell that because of what I'm wearing, and the kind of pouch I was using and stuff. And so it was that one time that I was like, let's just go out and just do it. And after that, then that took over. And so to answer your question, I'm ranting, but to answer your question, the stock really was, I was talking to them at the beginning. And for me, the interesting part of my street shows was always the opening. Well, the opening section up until when the body of the show took over. Now, I enjoyed all of it, but I really enjoyed just starting. And sometimes, and the starting was never the same for me. I would never do it the same twice. And I know you do that as well, right? So we both have that in common a lot.
Why would you never do the same thing twice?
It was playing. There's a lot of thought put into back then. One, it was just playing, and two, yet again, discussing a lot of theory with Owen Lean. I mean, me and him really helped each other out, and a lot of other performers too. But I came up with this idea, and I discussed it with a lot of people that I was going to, I always had the box or the bag and whatever props were inside it, and I came up with an idea that I wasn't going to open up and expose what's going to happen in the show until I had a few people involved, until I had like a small crowd that was worthy of a show. And that was number one I wanted. And number two was, well, they were on my side because they thought I was humorous, like it didn't have to be killing it, although I would like that, but it just had to be a positive show. So in my mind, well, it can only get better from then because they're not buying into just what the show is about. They're not buying into, well, I have a straitjacket out or I have the fire out first, and they're stopping because there's fire. And in my mind, that led to, not always, but sometimes at least, that I'll just get on with it. I want to see the trick. I don't want to be here for half an hour. And so I kind of thought, well, how I get around that is just start talking and start just saying hello to people and have funny conversations and try and see if I can just get a laugh. And I always know the stock lines are there if I want them, but most of the time it wasn't sitting at home running my own lines, and was just saying things to people, and that worked. Now, it didn't work all the time. It meant that a lot of the time I went out there and just started talking, and it just didn't happen. But the great thing about Dublin was, well, there's not 9 performers on pitch. I can just do it again. So I had that unique opportunity open to me that was just very easy just to demo and see what worked in that way.
And you're never repeating, I assume, because you're bouncing off what's happening around you. When you're talking to people, you're working off their conversation.
Absolutely.
So how could it be the same?
Absolutely. And if the street was quiet, there was a whole different show, because if I had to wait for the next person to come by and I have a family in front of me, that was a whole different kind of show than when it's really, really busy and you're just trying to, try to keep them all standing far back. And it was always different. And although I say I loved the entire show, it was certainly the beginning I loved the most. And sometimes, of course, so in some towns, I'm able to pretty much drag out the beginning and make that like pretty much the entire show, and then just quickly do a straitjacket. Sometimes even sacrifice the chain for the same payoff at the end. Like certainly areas like Galway and stuff, when I turn up there, it's, for me, for the kind of person I am, it's really, this is playtime. It's not work at all, because I suppose I've developed myself in that way, that very Irish, cheeky way that Irish people would respond well to, and people touring around Ireland would respond. Like, the American tourists would say, here's an Irishman that's as cheeky as the Irishman we feel we were going to meet. So I kind of fit into that stereotype, and I was happy to do it too. And I kind of, I made myself fit into that stereotype. I kind of wanted to be like, I would be the guy that you would like to have a drink with if you're going to have a drink with someone. So that's the kind of thing I play. So I wanted to be a good talker too. I think if I thought to myself, if I'm a good talker, I'm always going to be able to start and redo a whole new show and learn something new, because when I'm taking over the same skill every time, so I can rely on my ability to communicate fun with the crowd if everything else fails. And so that's kind of in my thinking around that.
Now, Gary, I know for a fact that you're not on Grafton Street now. I mean, I've worked in London with you for many, many years. So you obviously left the Islay land. Yeah.
So I left the band, and as I said earlier on, I was like, okay, so where can this go? What's happening now? Where can I go to prove myself? And Dublin was that would have been around 2013. 2013 was a big realization to me, because I developed this volunteer code, we called it, among buskers, because at the time it was on the verge of a lot of regulations coming into Dublin in the street. And so myself and a booker that I was working with at the time.
Can I ask why you think a lot of regulations were coming into the street?
Oh, it was just spoken about. It was just I was getting, I was pretty friendly with the manager of the Foot Locker, the shoe shop, and a few other people I knew because I've been there so long. And so it needs to be said that my understanding of a successful street show is that if there's a shop complaining about you, then you're doing something wrong. That was always my, if people from the very beginning, if someone would come out to me and say, "Oh, you're after messing this up for us, you're after blocking this," I was like, well, then obviously I can't be here, because that's, what are you doing? I'm not paying any rent to be there. I'm just having a good time. I'm trying to entertain people and make my living. So if I'm ruining it for someone, I don't want to be a part of it. There's something different to do. And so I was very, because of that, I was, and because of also the people I was hanging around with, JP with puppets and stuff, he was there as well. He's a big influence on me. And he was also the same. He was a lot more experienced than I was, but he was at the same belief that, I would have got it from him, that belief. And so I was in contact with a lot of people, and they were saying, well, there's a lot of trouble. The majority of buskers around here at the moment are trouble. And you have to also remember, there wasn't many buskers. There was probably there was a busker all the way down the street, but that was it. There was only, you would get there, they would get there at 7 in the morning, and that would be them all day long. And most of them at that stage were bands, and they were playing loud. You wouldn't play that loud in some clubs. And I know, because I was playing the clubs, and in a lot of the venues, you turn up and, oh no, we have this limit here because we're in a residential area, and it's like you're playing this club and it's quite low actually. For you would, when you're drunk in the crowd watching the band, you think, oh, it's great. But when you're up on stage and you've done the sound check, you know how low it is. And on the street, they just bring the equipment that they set up with the last night, because they're packing into the van, they unload it and they just blare out in the street. I was just shocked seeing that. So I was like, okay, well, rather than them coming to us, how about we go to them with a proposal? And so it was a pretty big thing. It was on the news, RTE news, which is the same as the BBC here. Obviously, a lot less people watching it in Ireland, but
Republic of Television, yeah.
Radio Television, Aaron, and and so what it was a voluntary code that we were going to follow a few rules that we rewrote. It was kind of like, before they tell us what to do, we were going to approach them and say, hey, we know, but check this out. And it was a voluntary thing. And I worked on that for a few months. I forget now how long it took. And then there was a launch day where we all came down and performed in a lovely area inside the shopping center. And it was because, it was supposed to be a way to working with the businesses. And the next day was kind of day one of this new thing. And none of the bands followed any of the things they said they were going to do. So I looked like the world's biggest dickhead, because I was the connection to most of these, and not just me, but I was one of the few performers that was a connection. There was other people on the scene that was doing more work maybe than I was, but I was the connection of the performers that was saying, this is going to work, this is really good. And it wasn't anything bad. It was just you have to move off, you have to a queue system is in operation on some pitches. There was no pitches taken away from us. You could work wherever you wanted, and you could work as much as you wanted, but you had to take a break from a specific spot in every 2 hours, and you had to, but you didn't have to leave it. You can go back to queue. So it was just fine, but they just didn't do it. Nothing changed. And then about, you can imagine 4 months later, it bounced back, and then it really started to get people had their own groups, and they were against this group, and this busker didn't like these people. And I remember seeing one band, a manager of the shop came out and told the band they're being too loud, and they just shouted "fuck off" on them. Can't win there. I remember seeing that happen, and it was oh, okay. So that was kind of going on. That was beginning to start, and on top of that, I was like, okay, well, what for me personally? Where is the next challenge at? What's going to happen? And I was always fascinated with the idea of Covent Garden. I was like, my God, if I can become a Covent Garden performer on the street, it's well, that's lovely. Because
why are we fascinated by the idea of Covent Garden?
Covent Garden is very common. There's the names in Covent Garden are known around Dublin, certainly among performers, and even through sometimes people who would come up to me after a show. And if you get into a taxi in Ireland, or if you go anywhere and deal with people in Ireland, it's ongoing. You buy a flower off someone and say you're a street performer, they'll nearly always go, oh, I was once in that Covent Garden. That's a fantastic place. Have you ever been there? It was a conversation I was having over and over and over again. And so I was like, well, that's obviously the place to be then. I should go and try and prove myself there. And to point out as well, growing up on the street, even though I was very confident as a performer in front of the audience, I was very shy among other entertainers, other street performers. And so I was on a slightly smaller pitch than a big pitch for years. And it was a great pitch, but for some reason, and I still don't figure out why I was like that. But let's say a performer would come to town and I would see one of their shows, I would go back down to the other spot and not trade off with them. And it was the strangest thing. I was just kind of shy, and I could do good shows. I was like, now they might have been way more experienced and better shows than me, but I don't remember now, because it's a long time ago. I don't remember now what it was. I would never nearly do a second show if they were around for some reason. And I knew Covent Garden was going to make me change that way. So I had that still in 2015 when I turned up in January in Covent Garden. And I think the first day, it took 3 days to get over that, because you just don't have the choice. I suppose that's the downfall with deciding whenever you can go on in the street. Maybe it played into it because I would look out in Grafton Street in Dublin and it would be like, it's not obviously there yet. It's like, no, it's a bit quiet. And so I could have the freedom to, but then you'd get a performer from overseas come in and it's not how they run things. When it's time to go, it's time to go. And so I was like, I would kind of get shy from that position and maybe missed out in learning something from being on a pitch with a better performer. And so that was a bit of a shame, a little bit, but I knew, well, Covent Garden will solve that. And then, yeah, going over to Covent Garden and being welcomed there by bloody incredible people. And I have to mention, I hate myself if I missed it out, but street performers were always the people I found I connected with the most. Even over musicians and over comedians and over everyone else, I always felt more connected to street performers, and I always felt that I liked them more and that they liked me more. And maybe that's because when I went to a juggling club, I wasn't really a juggler because I was earning on the street and I was only using it to, well, I want to do this trick, but really it's a routine and I'm talking. And same thing for magic. I go to all the magic clubs and try and learn there, but they all either got jobs or they're on the scene. And in all these areas you went to, another thing was some of them looked down on busking. They think, well, why the hell would you do that? I'm actually booked to be somewhere. And I was never like that. I was like, I would take a gig and I'd take the street. I never looked down. I just didn't understand the idea of looking down the street. If you can get a crowd, you can get a crowd, right? And you can make a living. And even if you can't get a crowd, well, at least you're trying something. You're not sitting on your arse at home, like doing nothing. So I never understood that.
So was there a sense of illegitimacy to street performance and to being a busker?
In Ireland? Yeah. I'm going to say there definitely is. Absolutely. Certainly when you go to higher level up. I've got a good friend who won a big competition. He came first place at a big competition, and he's still to this day he's a big player on the corporate scene. And he very soon realized he had to stop announcing the festival to these people who booked him from the corporate gigs. You have to just forget like it happened. And it's a very very reputable scene. Other street performers have won it and have done fantastic with it. Space Cowboy is one of them. Absolutely, when he did it, he launched.
Is this the World Busking Championship?
Yeah. Back when it was called
Layla, was it called?
Yeah, it was Layla sponsored. Layla Healthcare were the sponsors, and the Street Performance World Championship. The Street Performance World Championship. It's now called City Spectacular, and they don't do the competition thing anymore. And all it was the people had these huge big bins that you could sign off who was your favorite, and it was seen like I think there was like 300,000 people on average would come in over the weekend. Big festival. It's not that now. It's struggled in the past years. In the past few years. One, because the summers have started getting so hot. So that's a big killer to it. And for other reasons too. They started packing too much into it. That's a whole different discussion. But my point was, here we have this performer who's doing very well, and he won it, and then he had to he found out very, he was saying, oh yeah, I won that festival, and he was dealing with this corporate client, and the corporate client was like, what, so you were busking, you weren't paid to be there? And it's like, just a different world. It's a different world to some people.
It's like, I imagine after this last year just gone, I applied for a lot of jobs. Went on the internet and tried to get jobs when we all got locked down.
Yeah.
And when you write what you do, I've been a street entertainer for 20 years. I knew as you write it, what the people listening to it or reading it imagine is a guy with 3 teeth sitting in a doorway playing a penny whistle.
Yeah.
That's what they imagine.
And then even if you were to have some fictional position that you actually could show them what you do, they would still just think, oh, so you're just really good at the version that I originally thought you were. Like, it's so it's yeah. Now I understand it from a business point of view. I understand it from people doing corporate. I kind of get that. What I don't understand is at the performer level. What I said was, when I was at these other gigs, that's why I didn't connect so well with other people. I didn't understand why other jugglers would look down on it. Because in my opinion, there is no greater opportunity for people who are interested in performing to go out and perform.
Stage time.
Yeah, for stage time. Now, I would also argue that, like, 10 minutes on stage at a stand-up comedy club, I've thought about this a lot. 10 minutes on stage at a stand-up comedy club, I would argue, is kind of like half an hour on the street.
Okay.
Simply because although when you do the majority, like 90% of the street shows are, comedy shows, in to a degree, they're supposed to get laughs, but you don't have to get laughs. You don't have to. Like, it's nice, and you want to, and you work towards that. But that's how you do this bizarre show where nobody laughs. Well, you still do the thing. You still do the juggle, or you do the magic, or this thing still happens, and you still have a middle, beginning, and end. Even if you took all your jokes out, you still have it. On a stand-up, when I first did my first stand-up, yet again, I started all over again and went to the open mics. I thought, I'm going to ace this. This is going to be easy. 16 years I was performing professionally, and my first time at doing stand-up, I died. It was one of the worst deaths I've ever had on stage.
Before we get to that, because we're at an hour and a half now, so you have half an hour left.
Oh, wow.
Time flies. I do really want to get to that, so let's hit up and speed through as much as we can. You're in Covent Garden. You come to Covent Garden.
Yes, I'm in Covent Garden. Come to Covent Garden. Welcomed by a fantastic community. As I've said, street performers are the best. And I was doing a Straight Jacket show then. So it went from the Cups and Balls, the magic show I was doing, to the Straight Jacket show. And the reason that I did that was because I wanted to talk more jokes, more silliness, and the Straight Jacket, I think, lends itself better than nearly any other street show you can do, because not a lot happens, and you just get tied up, and you can just make fun with people. So I come to Covent Garden, and I do my first show. I've got the 3:20 on Saturday, like maybe the second week of January, and I'm on after Tash, and I'll explain. People watching don't know who Tash is. I was seeing show after show, actually a lot of escape shows, a lot of Straight Jacket shows that day, and I was thinking, yeah, I got this. I can do a show among these guys. This is going to be nice. And then Tash gets out there, and she's hanging by her toes off like a 13-foot tripod stick, and she's upside down juggling knives. I've never felt so pathetic in my life, just wheeling my box out after that on this massive pitch. And I did it. I went through with it, and I did it, and it was what it was. I was way too fast. I was going too quick. Their nerves did play into it, but I got through the show, and it was a fine show. But the pay was fine. It was good. It was surprisingly better than I thought it was going to be my first show. Although I did think it was a lot more. And that's another story. I thought when I got that money, because I had never collected in pounds before, and pounds are way heavier than euros. And so I looked down at this, go, oh my God. And then it was like probably half what I thought it was. I'm like, oh, okay. And another thing, the the way money works here is like you get so many pounds, and in Ireland you just get so many twos. €2 is just, if someone's going to give you a coin, it's going to be a two. And so that was a whole different thing. Oh, right, so if they give you a coin here, it's nearly going to be either a couple of ones or just one, or maybe 3 ones. That's just, so it's just done. People think about giving a tip here very differently when it comes to coins. Anyway, so I would move on then in Covent Garden, and like when it came to Covent Garden, once I kind of figured out where I stood, I struggled for the winter. I'm not going to lie there. I struggled. I bailed a lot of shows, which is starting and you can't really get it going. And then you just stop. So I was doing that a lot in February and March. I was fitting into the group and I knew how to do that. I just knew go to the pub with them and buy them a drink. And that was one of my favorite things to do. It's not so much connected to alcohol, but it normally happens in the pub. My favorite thing to do with performers is to sit with them just like this and not so much talk theory with performers and their way of doing it and my way of doing it, and talk about it. And if it's over coffees or over beers, that's my favorite thing to do. So I would pick off in Covent Garden who here likes to go for a drink and bring them for drinks. So I had I had my people very, very early, and I had to figure out how to do the crowd. And that was tough. And that pretty much happened overnight, that I fell in love with the place, because winter was tough of 2015, and 2015 Easter kicked in. And that was, I remember people saying it, still to this day, they're saying that was an incredible Easter. It just, the weather was great and everyone turned up and it was beautiful. And then I think I started making some of my record hats like back to back type of thing. And then from then on, I was walking to work laughing. I was so happy. I was singing to myself. I was so proud to be with the Covent Garden performers, who I absolutely loved, even all of them in their own way, as weird as some of them are. And I had my group of people who I just couldn't have more respect for. And yeah, it was special. I just felt like this is, wow, I'm here. I'm one of them. I must be. I believe in myself, but I also, I feel that, wow, this is a good moment to be, because I've heard Covent is a hard pitch, and it was. Like, it wasn't that it was easy, but I just fell in love with it so much. And then and then that was that challenge for a couple of years. And then, okay, so the next year, 2016, I got sick and my bladder expanded, and that was bad, and I had to go into hospital, and they had to put a stent in to hold my bladder in position and hope whatever happened didn't happen, because they couldn't figure out what it was. And yeah, it was just a nightmare. And then the stent, my bladder didn't like the stent, and it got infected, and it got encrusted. The stent got encrusted to my bladder with all these kidney stones, and they couldn't get it out. And so that was 7 months where I couldn't really walk very well at all. And I was still doing shows. I just made my show in such a way that I wasn't walking. I was fine like this, sitting down, and I could move my arms. But once I had the motion of walking or moving my legs at all, the pain was just too much. So I would do the entire show getting tied up in the straitjacket and the chain without moving, and which is easy enough to do, really, And it was the shows weren't great, but at least I was still, because my mind would go crazy if I wasn't working. So I was still doing something. But then it got real bad in November. I think I got sick in just September. And the end of November, December, it got very, very bad. And I wasn't able to do any work. And then that went right on to about March. And it was in the hospital, because I was in the hospital quite a lot for 7 months. And it was in the hospital. I was like, okay, when I come out of here, it's going to be just a new piece of life. And so I want to do something way different. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do a stand-up comedy show in the street. I'm going to do no tricks. I'm going to bring my guitar in. I'm going to do funny things that I kind of like Dave McSavage, although it's just a very different style. It was more constructed. It was more written. There was very little stock in it. It was just songs and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, in March, it was successful, finally a successful little operation to remove the stent. Still don't know what happened to my bladder in the first place, but I can remember leaving the hospital, going in, not being able to walk, and a week later coming out and just running because I could, and just being so happy and grabbing the guitar. Yeah, exactly. Just honestly, it was like that. It was like, ah! And so grabbing the guitar and going to Covent Garden and going to Leicester Square and going to any pitch I could get on and trying to develop the stand-up comedy show on the street, and it was disastrous. It was I don't think of all the shows I did, I never got a show off. Like I came close to having the correct crowd, or I came close to to delivering the routine correctly, but it never kicked. And I probably did about not a lot, but maybe 30 or 40 shows like that trying. And then
why do you think it never kicked?
I tried it in all different ways. I just found that people would stop for a period. It was always a moment that, like, if a joke worked, if a joke really kicked, it would get a big laugh and a round of applause, and then it was like it was kind of nearly the show's over now. And maybe that's completely on me, because I developed by putting everyone's focus to a thing, to a trick, to an object, to something that they can wait for, because when he touches this, when he does the thing with that, it's over. But instead, I was putting all the attention onto the song that's about to happen. I'm going to sing the song about this, and that was my idea of how to keep them there. It just wasn't strong enough. It just, I found that was the killer to the show most. If a joke really worked, or a small little routine really worked, it was too much, and then they would leave because there was nothing to keep them. And then if it didn't work, well, then you're just building a couple of people, and there's no, I wasn't consistent enough with my humor. It wasn't like boom. It was nowhere near as consistent as the beginning of a show, knowing I got a prop in a box. I was trying to tap into who I was when I'm doing my straitjacket show, and it for whatever reason, it just never kicked. It never was it, and it certainly never paid. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do 50-50 to straitjacket and then the guitar and the stand-up. And then I was like, then I came up with the idea, okay, well, I've been meaning to do indoor stand-up for a while, and that just seems to be the next place to be, because I'm in London now. I'm paying rent in London. I'm busking every day. I don't really want to redo a whole thing. If I'm going to go back to the straitjacket, how about I do something different completely? Because I want to do something different, but how about I just keep this as my job on the street, and then just do the clubs, do the stand-up, and develop that way, and just see what happens. I wasn't ever really interested in being a stand-up, or the Edinburgh, and having my own hour-long show as a stand-up on the circuit. Didn't really think much about that. I just wanted something else to kind of feel that I'm learning that section of performance now. That was really what it was for my own self, because I knew that even at a semi-successful level as a stand-up, going around all the gigs, I'd be touring in the same places I'm going as a street performer, earning quite decent money, and I would never earn this money if I was on the stand-up circuit, and I would never get as much stage time. I could go to a town and do 3 shows, which I was doing. I'm like, why do I want to do that in a small club? Do my 10 minutes on stage, maybe for free for the first 2 or 3 years. It's like so it was really only just to learn a new thing, and to experience stand-up, because I just loved it so much. I have so much respect for comedians. I'm like, oh well, I'll give that a go then. And I decided I was going to do the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for my first time in 2017. With an hour-long stand-up comedy show, and
had you done open mics? Had you worked
no,
slow?
I did my first open mic around the Christmas time, or just maybe around Christmas time, and then like around 6 months later, I was doing the Edinburgh thing. And of course, as the performer, I felt very confident that even if the show was shit, which it was, there was sections that was good, but overall it wasn't a very well constructed show. But I knew as a performer, it's not the end of the world, because I can get through an hour-long show. That's not a very hard thing. I can get through an hour-long show. As a pure stand-up, no, but I don't need to be a pure stand-up in front of them. As long as I'm entertaining, and I can go different ways. And I had the guitar. It was a comedy music show where I had funny songs, and I knew, well, if I need to kill a bit of time, I'm good enough at the guitar to do something that they're not going to expect me to be able to do. And so that played into my hands a little bit. And the venue was, Edinburgh is Edinburgh. You never know what you're going to get. And I got a cupboard like the one I'm in now. The only difference was my room and the room on next to me that was also having shows, we were separated by blankets and pillows. So blankets and pillows were put up, and I was on against a 3-piece sketch act, kind of like Monty Python type thing, and they're just running around the room. Great show, but you can imagine we had to agree to not use amplifiers. So I had the acoustic guitar, and it was difficult to say the least. And a sink in the room. There was like a sink just sitting there next to where I was performing. It was kind of like that. It didn't work, but it was just, the room was horrible. But I knew, hey, this is Edinburgh.
That's almost even worse that the sink doesn't work. If you're going to have a sink there, at least it'd be a functional sink. I can do something.
It didn't even work. It was just a body of a sink leaning against the wall, because trust me, I looked at it, why it's not working, and I said, well, it's not, it's just a body of a sink. Well, why didn't they think to just move, like you could just move it? But then we weren't allowed to move anything. That is what it was, and that's Edinburgh, and you get your ass handed to you, and I did all that. Would I do it again? No, I didn't personally like Edinburgh. I just don't like what it does to a few people in Edinburgh. I think people go with too much expectation. In my opinion, people go with too much expectation of what they're going to get out of Edinburgh, and I just seen it destroy too many of my friends. I'm not a huge Edinburgh fan. I think there's way better festivals for people to go to, certainly at a kind of an amateur level.
On the stage, I definitely agree. On the street, I personally think it's one of the best festivals in the world, and I think if you're a competent street performer, you can definitely make a living there. You can save a decent amount of money, but I hear exactly the same thing from people on the stage, is that it's such an overcrowded marketplace that if you're paying for a venue, you're going to lose money, guaranteed. I talked to Mick Dow on Wednesday, and I don't remember where he said it in the interview or after, but he said they made 27,000 the first year they went there, and they lost money.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Pulled in £27,000 on the door, and they lost money.
Oh man, we all know horror stories about Edinburgh. We all know a lot of people horror stories about Edinburgh, and there are better for people I know through the stand up. There are better festivals. So I'll talk a bit about so the stand up thing. I started doing the stand up, and I did a 2017 in Edinburgh, and I came back and. Edinburgh kicked my ass in a way it kicks everybody's ass. Certainly when you're doing the indoor and the outdoor. If I'm honest, for whatever reason, I didn't connect with the crowds at Edinburgh on the street. Maybe I was stressed because of my indoor show. Maybe I was flying for 2 or 3 hours a day, and it just wasn't kicking for me. And I was maybe that's what it was. Maybe if I went now without that stress, I'd be better. But for whatever reason, I never connected in the street in Edinburgh. Certainly not the way I thought I was going to, because I thought, given the because I like a quiet street and to work on them over a period of time. And so the Mounds too at 11 o'clock is my favorite. I just love it. And the rain though. My best show in Edinburgh was Rained On, and I got it maybe a third of what I would have. I remember that show very well. I was angry because that's the thing.
It sounds like you're desperately trying to escape what Edinburgh is for your show to work.
Yeah. So anyway, I come back from Edinburgh and I'm thinking, okay, well, what am I doing now? And I decide to give Edinburgh another go. And I'm like, I'm not really excited about that. I'm like, am I just going to go around in circles here? And I was like, okay, well, I'm doing the open mics and I'm kind of on the verge of, beginning to get the stand-up gigs, and that's going well. Still not connect. No one would really give me any time at the open mics because I just wasn't connected to them. I didn't have a normal job. They kind of thought, I kind of got a vibe off them that, why are you here? Like, you're a professional performer. Not because I'm good, but because, why are you here? It's kind of, I just never connected with anyone on the stand-up scene until I ran my own night. And so I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run my own night, and I'm going to get all the stage time I want, and I'm going to use it just to, like, I'll book acts and I'll do loads of stage time myself, and I'll book it just to create a really good show for Edinburgh. Just that was a nice way to tackle Edinburgh, like to get really good stage time, and so I don't have to book anywhere else. And then the first night I ran, that whole plan went out the window. I was now going to focus on running the best nights I can because I had the best time ever running the open mic nights. Because the people who came were just, I was just so interested. I found myself so interested in them as performers because it was the first time in my life it wasn't watching a performer perform. It was watching people who were connected to the real world, who've got real responsibilities, and maybe actually have something to say, perform. And not that performers don't, but we're so long at this that, like, we and we're so disconnected from reality, and we're used to bringing people into our reality, and for them, that's crazy. It's like even the idea of where we perform a lot of times, this is on the street. It's like, well, he must be a little bit nuts because this is what he does for a living. Even if you do a normal show on the street, you're still disconnected from society. And so it was my first time. So my whole idea of looking at performance changed. I don't really class myself really as much of a performer when it comes to booking the nights, even though I MC most of my shows because I love the MCing. But really, it was to offer a stage and to other people who want to work at it and to develop and to see the same joy in other people that I have in myself. I became obsessed with that. Certainly, when I see someone smash it now, when you see a great act turn up, and you just know, even though they're at like the open mic level and they're hovering around there, getting progressing slowly all the time, and they're really good. That's obviously great because fair play on them. They're up and coming and they're really good. But what's magic is when you see someone who just drops the ball for whatever reason, and you think you have them written off. Oh, this person doesn't really know what they're doing, and you see them like again, and it kicks for them. And I ran a very energetic night. A lot of people have told me it was very much like being at a real comedy club. Because another reason I ran my own night was because I really hated the open mics in London, if I'm honest. And anyone who knows me from the comedy circuit knows that I dislike the open mics in London. I take the piss out of them all the time. There's a handful that are good. The majority are just rubbish, and they're too long. Like when you go and see 20 acts and you're there for 3.5 hours, that's too long. I was running like 11 or 12 acts, and it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. The show is just, that's nice. Everyone, your ass isn't killing you on the seat. You can just leave, and everyone feels good, and they've been given focus rather than just being one of the million. And so my point I was making was, what's magic to me was seeing a performer who didn't do well, or seeing a performer who hasn't done well, and all of a sudden figuring something out, or changing something, or listening to how the audience is responding, and actually dealing with it after your set, and turning up again when you're being given the ball by the MC and running with it, and it being successful, and watching a performer smash a show for the first or second time that they've ever done it. Even if I don't go up and congratulate them, I watch them as they sit down after a roar and after just having an audience out of the palm of their hand, and they just sit down, and you can just tell they're taking a moment because they've just succeeded at something that they've worked so hard for so long, and they knew they could do it, but they had nothing to base that belief on because they've done it a few times and it hasn't worked for them, and now all of a sudden they finally get to feel what it was like to be by far the best act of the night. And so I found it so interesting watching all that, because having experience, I know what it looks like when I see it. I know when someone walks on and it hits right with them at the beginning. I know, oh, this is going to be good. Unless they really drop the ball, they're onto something here with this set. And then even when they don't notice it, which actually helps them out more, because sometimes you can kind of walk on, and for me, sometimes I walk on and I might kill it with the opening joke, and then I think, oh, this is going great for me, and then maybe I don't pay attention later on in the set, and it kind of dips a bit, like, oh shit, I got to pay attention here. I can't presume I know what I'm doing here. And so when I see an amateur performer going up and they kill it with the opening line, it's working for them, and then they don't even know they have it, and they're going to smash this, and then there's a moment where it just goes over the edge. Oh, I love all that. And so that was it.
It sounds like you've taken a huge amount of joy from becoming a facilitator, creating an environment and a space for other people to grow. But what I'm interested in, we really are reaching the last few minutes now, so I want to squeeze a bit more information about this. What were your challenges? When you set up the night, what were the things you had to overcome to create what is a I'm right in thinking this is like 10 nights usually throughout the month when
Yeah,
we're not
depending on what
in
week.
quarantine.
Yeah, depending on, just before quarantine it was 7. It was 6 or 7 nights a week, depending on what week it was. But in November, last November, no, we've been in quarantine a year. No, yeah,
It, yeah.
so before, yeah,
So not
oh
last
my God,
November, the November before. Yes.
the November before. This is mental how long this has gone off. This has gone on for. This is craziness. But the November before, I was running 10 nights for a lot of weeks. I was running 10. Now some of the gigs were like monthly, so but there was a few times when it was run up to be 10 gigs a week, and obviously I'm not at them all. I was getting people into MC, and that was crazy. That was, if I'm honest, that was the toughest that it's been, because I really wanted to create the first open mic where people can get paid. I wanted to develop that. And now obviously I can't do that if I'm only doing one gig, but I figure sooner or later a pub is going to pay me, and I can actually offer like an open invitation, come and do 8 to 10 minutes, and I'll book 5 acts, and they'll all get like 20 quid. It's not a lot, but it's the first time the majority of them have ever been paid. And I just thought, like, I wonder what will happen to them. What kind of way will they perform if it's their first time together? It was very interesting to me, and it's just a nice thing. It's like, and the bar were paying, so I found a bar that were paying and all that kind of stuff. And it turned out, the bar were not doing well, and I'd agreed that this was all going to be so 5 acts is 100 quid a night. So the bar weren't doing well, they couldn't pay me, and I kept kind of saying, well, that's fine, but I'd already booked all these shows because I booked 2 months in advance. Once I get the go ahead, I booked 2 months in advance, and so I make all the promotion. Every single individual gig gets a different poster with every single comedian's name on it. They all get a send. It's a huge amount of work gone into the 2 months, and so it went on. I never got paid from that bar. I never saw money. So I was funding this open mic with this open mic type of thing. So if one open mic didn't do well, because that gig was on a Thursday, so let's say I come into like Monday and that didn't do very well, I didn't make much money in the bucket. Well, the Tuesday I would have to get combined those 2 money so I could pay the acts that were good, because I didn't want to do a thing where I'm canceling. I'm thinking, well, something's going to give, and every now and then there was a well-paid gig that would just fund a lot of it. But it was stressful, to say the least. Now, your question was, what was? I'll try and wrap this up. Your question was, what were the difficulties? I think the difficulties all came when I started street performing. It was figuring out the difference between when I started stand up. It was figuring out the difference between street performing and stand up, because as I said, I thought I was going to smash it. I didn't. I died, and I've never been a believer that one performance skill can cover you on others. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, once you can do the street, you can do anything. I don't believe in that. I don't believe you can do anything, you can do anything else. I believe there's a specific amount of hurdles to do anything, whether it's kids' parties as a magician or on the street, whatever. You have to give your time in. And I was a little optimistic, silly optimistic, when I was going into stand-up, and I found loads of differences that I had to change up. But emceeing, that's a whole different thing. That's not necessarily stand-up. I can make the fun. I can take fun out of whoever I want as an MC, and I did. I made fun of other nights. That was a very easy way to get everyone connected in the room, because here we got a booker and an MC of a comedy night and open mic who's just taking the piss out of every other night. And so I kind of made this thing where I'm against all them. I'm the best in town. Their night is shit compared to mine. And I would openly invite that kind of attitude. And a lot of people kind of really liked it. And I would take the piss out of other bookers, other promoters, to their face when they're there, which it just was a celebration kind of vibe because I don't think many other bookers on the scene do that. And so,
am I right in thinking it's not a small group, but it's a community, so people know each other. So yeah, so when you're taking the piss out of other nights' events, and the people in the room know who those people are.
Everyone knows who everyone is. Yeah. So I found, well, that's my in, because I can be cheeky, and I at this stage I can get away with with doing that line with a smile on my face. So there's no harm. I'm not serious about this. And I'm like, and I would always invite those same bookers to my nights and stuff. And we would have great fun back and forth with each other a lot of the time. And I think it was a breath of fresh air for people on a scene that I found was very dead and you couldn't get out of. And I was just offering a lot of paid work and like small paid work, but still I was like paid work. And I also ran a competition that was funded entirely off people's donations at the end. And we ran a month-long competition, sold at the Museum of Comedy for the finale, and had 12 acts on that night. And that was a huge success. That was lovely. And yeah, and then pre-COVID, I was trying to create a world record around London of the most amount of comedy gigs performed in a month. Now I know Edinburgh, you can't, but I was trying to find loopholes that I could include so that it would be some sort of world record. And so I got in contact with maybe about 30 venues. I was going to get in contact with maybe 350 venues. And I was going to do from 9 o'clock in the morning right through in all these different places, just as a huge project and a fun thing, and try and bus people around London, the comics, and do a show, this craziness. And then of course COVID hit, and now all the plans for the future they're different. They're very exciting, but they're all very, very different now. It's yeah. So look at that.
So
2 minutes past 10.
2 minutes past. So we'll tie everything up with this. First of all, what do you have to say to people who are beginning in music, in comedy, or in street performance? Any advice you'd like to give after your long career?
I give the same thing to a lot of, certainly with comedians. I think that's if people watch this back after, I feel it's going to be comedians off the YouTube channel, which I've set up since lockdowns happened, a tutorial comedy YouTube channel. So I think the reach is going to be comedians, but I would give everyone the same thing. I would say,
name of the channel, please.
Oh, Let's Talk Comedy is the name of the channel, and that is a stand-up. Let's Talk Comedy, and that is a stand-up comedy performance and writing tutorial channel. And there's a lot of other things in there as well. So there's over 50 videos in there, and I make them all as a talking head video and channel, and go check it out. However, I always say the same thing when people ask me what to do for their first gig, and it's always the same. It's get to your 50th gig and then think about the material and the jokes, and from 1 to 50 work on being likable. Get up on stage and figure out how to hold the mic, figure out how to relax in front of your audience, take a few gigs to listen to the silence between where you're supposed to be getting laughs. And don't worry if you don't get laughs or not, but take time to listen to how you sound as you talk to people, all those things, because they're overlooked when it comes to the amateur scene. They're overlooked, and your jokes aren't important yet. The beginning, get to 50 appearances at open mics, and then of course you're writing jokes all the time, and you go up with jokes and you say the jokes, but it doesn't matter if they don't get a laugh. It doesn't matter if they don't get a laugh 10 gigs in a row, because what you're up there at the very beginning doing is getting used to standing on stage, getting used to being in front of people, because all that, I guarantee you, if you only focus on how strong your joke is and it works in your own head, and you go up there and you present it in front of your friends and their friends, you're going to have a very difficult time, because no one's told you. It's frightening. And certainly in stand-up, the silence is deafening between the laughs, or where you expect the laughs to be. And so if you just focus on getting through and experiencing it, and dealing with getting booked and sending in the emails and presenting yourself in the way that you feel is good for you to present yourself, and just being likable on the stage, going up there with a smile. And even if you want to be a deadpan performer, understanding what that is, whatever it is you want to be, understanding what it is at the most basic level you can imagine possible. And then when you get to gig 50, then start wanting to get the jokes and thinking about, okay, well, why am I getting the laughs, or else go in the direction to where you're getting the majority of laughs.
Okay, and last thing, very, very quickly, I'm sure there's lots of people who haven't seen your face until watching this interview, lots of friends, lots of people you've bumped into from around the world. Anything you'd like to say to all those people?
I think I'd like to. Yeah, yeah, there is actually. I really, really cannot wait to be able to see them all again. That's it, really. I can't wait to book another gig and have all the people at the gigs turn up. I can't wait to push a box onto a spot on the side of a street somewhere and see someone who happens to be there as well and do a couple of shows and go for a couple of beers. I can't wait to just, and obviously I've got other things planned for the future in terms of where I'm going to be and stuff, but I do know that when things bounce back, I'm certainly going to be making a round of all of the things that I've done over the last few years in order to, for the only reason to see those exact people that you just mentioned that I've met along the way. So I just can't wait for all this absolute madness, rubbish, bullshit to end. And until then, I'm going to not voice my opinion about any of it on social media.
Good on you. There you go, everybody. Friends, wait, Gary will come in knocking in 4 to 5 months' time.
Yes.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for creating such a fantastic platform for certainly people who haven't had it before. It is so important. And what you've done here with this channel has been absolutely incredible. And you started before I started on the YouTube, and it motivated me to get it done because I was thinking about it when I saw you do it. You definitely influenced me to do it. So thank you for making this channel, because we're all honored to be on it, and I'm honored to be a part of the other people you've had on it too. So I really, really appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome, and it's an honor to have you on here and everybody else who's done this. It's only one guy sitting here staring at a screen without the guests coming on and giving their histories and fleshing out the archive, which you've done beautifully today.
I appreciate that.
No worries. Everyone who's watching, guys, thank you for watching. Got a big favor to ask. If you enjoyed watching the video, please give it a like, comment on it. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're on Facebook, please follow The Incorrigible Rogue or join Whining On with Public Performers, or visit our website, www.whiningon.com. If you want to join the Patreon, £1 or £2 a month really does make a big difference. For now, from me, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Good night.